Okay, welcome everybody today. It's Friday, February 19th, 2016, and we're excited that you all could join us for our second virtual seminar of our 2016 virtual seminar series here at the Center for Disaster Research and Education. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today. Today we have our special speaker, Miss Jessica Cerutti. She's actually an alumni of the MSCM program here at Millersville University. Today she's going to be talking about emergency management and the collaborative economy. Jessica is a 2014 graduate of the Millersville MSCM program. She is currently an emergency management specialist with Tetra Tech in the San Francisco Bay Area. Ms. Cerutti's experience spans multiple areas within emergency management, including operational planning, hazard mitigation planning, training and exercise planning, and exercise facilitation and evaluation. In the Bay Area, Ms. Cerutti is working with the Bay Area Urban Area Security Initiative, UASI, and local communities and counties on a variety of operations and mitigation-related projects. Prior to moving to the Bay Area, Ms. Cerutti served as a UASI planner for the Newark, Jersey City UASI in New Jersey. In this role, Ms. Cerutti developed multiple regional plans for the New Jersey UASI, 7 counties, and 2 core cities, including shelter, mass care, fire rehabilitation, and mass fatality management plans. Please help me welcome Ms. Jessica Cerutti. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. As he mentioned, I am a graduate of the program. Super excited to be back virtually. So I am currently located in San Francisco Bay Area. And that's, of course, as you know, a hop, skip, and a jump from Silicon Valley, which is very relevant to this topic today. So in addition, I wanted to mention that I will be presenting this topic during the Florida Governor's Annual Hurricane Conference in May, alongside another Millersville alum who was able to join us today, Elise Staley. So I'll be looking at the collaborative economy, and she'll be looking at the increased use of social media and pop culture in emergency management. So with that, this is just what I will be discussing today, our agenda. It's important to really understand what the collaborative economy is, just beyond I click an app and someone comes and picks me up in their personal car. That's why I wanted to take some time on terminology and the history, as well as the actual future of the collaborative economy. From there, I want to take a look at connecting the dots. How exactly does the collaborative economy fit into emergency management? We'll also look at some concerns and considerations. You know, this is a new concept. It's a new concept as both an economic model and an opportunity for integration with emergency management. So there's bound to be some growing pains, including some very serious issues to consider. From there, we'll look at a few case studies, particularly with the San Francisco Bay Area, BayShare, Airbnb, and Uber. I'll talk a little bit about initial steps for integrating this concept into an emergency management program. And finally, I want to guide you through a brief exercise where I want you to think about how to integrate some of these platforms. And with that, it's really important to know that this is such a new concept that there's no wrong answers. So I hope to have some good discussions. So before we dive into the meat of this presentation, I just wanted to go over some terminology. First, for the purpose of today, I wanted to kind of define what a startup is. A startup is a new company. It's collaborative economy based, and it provides a new service or a product presented outside of the traditional economic marketplace. So basically, you don't have to go somewhere to buy something or to physically hail a taxi cab. Second, many of you may have heard about something called the sharing economy, and may be wondering why I keep referring to the collaborative economy. You may have also heard peer economy, peer-to-peer exchange, things like that. Aren't they all the same? Well, yes and no. When I first started looking into this topic, the term sharing economy was standard, and it was used interchangeably with those other terms. At its core, The sharing economy is focused on underused assets of private individuals, whether it's an unused room for Airbnb, or maybe if you have a bridesmaid's dress that you never want to wear again that you want to sell on eBay. Well, the collaborative economy kind of encompasses that as more and more startups came into existence, because there is no longer a distinct focus on simply individuals sharing their stuff. This focus was increased to focus on decentralized networks that really bypass those traditional middlemen that you think of when you think of a traditional economic marketplace. So it's no longer individuals, but it's also larger companies as well. Finally, the platform is the actual application. It can be mobile, it can be something on your desktop, and that's what basically allows you to exchange your wares with providers and to actually communicate with those kind of umbrella corporations. It's the app on your Android or your iPhone that lets you call for an Uber, or it's the app that lets you post something that you want to sell on Poshmark. Most of these things can be downloaded on your smartphone, but as I mentioned, they are available on your PC or your Mac as well. Some things like cryptocurrency still baffle me, but I digress. I may talk about that a little later. So the last thing, which I don't have up there, but I'm sure that you're familiar with, but I just wanted to touch upon briefly, were two collaborative economy companies that I'm going to be using pretty regularly through this presentation. The first one is Airbnb and the second one is Uber. Like I said, most of you are probably aware, but in case you're not, Airbnb is a collaborative economy platform that allows individuals to share their unused space. So instead of staying at a hotel if you're on vacation or visiting someone, you can actually stay in someone's house or stay in their extra living space. And all of that is facilitated through the use of the Airbnb platform. Uber is similar. Uber instead, however, provides you with transportation options. So if you don't want to hail a taxi cab, you pull out your phone, use your Uber app, call a driver, the driver comes and picks you up, drops you off where you want to go. There's no money exchange because it's all done through the platform. And a lot of people have found that it's a much more practical transportation option as opposed to something like a traditional taxi. So, the history and the future of the collaborative economy. eBay is really considered the first collaborative economy business, and it was started in 1996, so about 20 years ago. And through eBay, individuals were able to network with each other in order to sell privately owned goods through a mutual exchange of trust and money. You also see a little later on, you have Craigslist, again, mutual exchange, trust, sometimes money. Trust is a big key with the collaborative economy, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And that's particularly important as we further discuss this integration with emergency management. What we know today is the collaborative economy started with Airbnb and Uber in the late 2000s, because this was the first time that this type of sharing could go mobile with the use of smartphones. Does anybody watch Shark Tank by chance? Hands? Nobody? Oh, one? Okay, good. Well, if you do, if you don't, there's one shark who's named Mr. Wonderful, and he always talks about building a better mousetrap. And what that means is that people like to use products that make things you do easier. So if you always have to grab a taxi, again, use Uber. It's easier. You have a dedicated driver for you that picks you up. So the collaborative economy platforms have essentially built that better mousetrap by allowing consumers to bypass the traditional marketplace and use what's most convenient for them. This convenience has resonated with society, and the collaborative economy continues to grow exponentially with a 25% increase in participation between 2014 and 2015. That's what I have up there on the right. Jeremiah Ouyang, he is the founder of the Crowd Companies Council here in Silicon Valley, and he co-authored a report called New Rules of the Collaborative Economy. And in that report, he estimates that by 2017, 8 in 10 Americans will actually participate in some way, shape, or form in the collaborative economy. So Jeremiah Owyang developed this honeycomb model that you see on your left. And so you have an overall breakdown of categories which groups the general types of startups. From there you have classes, which further break down those families into specific functions of startups. For example, transportation. What type of transportation is provided? Is it a service where someone comes and picks you up, or are you loaning a vehicle? And finally, from there, you have example startups of what would be found within that particular family and class. It's important to note that this honeycomb model is from 2014, and chances are some of these startups are no longer in business. On the other side, some new startups have come into focus, and so they should be added. So this economy model is so new that it hasn't regulated itself yet. It's constantly expanding and contracting as different startups test the marketplace to identify and capitalize on a need. Sometimes they strike out. Sometimes they increase to a multi-billion-dollar company within 7 years after launch. Actually, just yesterday, I heard about a new transportation sharing, ride-sharing startup that's going to be officially launched in April. It's called Juno. And what Juno is currently doing is they are keeping their model extremely hush, but they are kind of sneaking into Uber's marketplace by paying Uber drivers to track their routes when they pick people up. So it's really interesting to see how this economy is going to grow and how competing interests are going to try to get the leg up on another. So getting back to this honeycomb model, does anybody notice anything vaguely familiar about the families? If you do, hold on and we'll come back to it in a few minutes. Because it's definitely what will bring us into the entire collaborative economy and emergency management integration. All right, so now you have a little bit better understanding of the collaborative economy. Again, maybe a little bit more than before, where you were just like, well, I need an Uber, click the app, have someone come pick me up. But what exactly does this mean for emergency management? It means a few things. As we discussed, the participation in the collaborative economy continues to increase. As a result, these companies will continue to influence the way we operate on a daily basis. For example, going to a stranger's house for a dinner party while visiting a new city won't actually be so strange, and that is actually a platform called Cookening. So next time you go on vacation, there you go, you can make a new friend. So next, I'm sure you've heard about FEMA's whole community approach. And what this basically says is that a resilient community is one where the whole community is involved in the emergency management process. That includes local business, it includes government officials, it also includes residents, the individual residents of the community. And finally, as we discussed, the collaborative economy has its root in individuality. Remember when I mentioned eBay and trust? Well, you have something I want, so I use a platform to get it from you, and we'll work together with a mutual trust during that exchange to make sure that both you and I are happy with the final product, with the final result. So in essence, the collaborative economy is inherently based on goodwill and exchange for the betterment of both parties involved. So if you put those things together, what you have is a truly whole community approach to expanding emergency management capabilities, because now you have access to assets owned by private individuals or entities. Additionally, connectivity through information technology increases your reach for communicating with those individuals. So if someone doesn't have resources that you're looking for locally, these platforms can expand your reach to tap into assets that are located in different communities, different counties, possibly even different states or even different countries. So remember the honeycomb model. And I'll give you another moment to look at it. And again, I pose the question, does anything about this model look vaguely familiar? And again, with emergency management in mind. Does anybody have any guess? I see Elise says yes. What does it look like to you, Elise? ESF, emergency support functions. Exactly. So for those of you who may not be familiar with emergency support functions, they essentially provide a structure for interagency support and resource coordination. This can be at a local EOC level. That's where I became familiar with ESFs, was at Morris County, New Jersey, and their EOC. So basically, ESFs are grouped into the most frequently used categories during response to streamline and support different areas during a disaster, during an emergency. While not exactly dead on, this honeycomb model mimics a snapshot of some of these ESFs. For example, you have ESF1, which is transportation. Well, right there, the pink honeycomb, you have transportation. ESF6, mass care. We're starting to stretch a little bit. Mass care can be crosswalked into the space family for the honeycomb model. You have ESF8, public health, again, starting to stretch a little bit, but you have the health and wellness up there in the upper right-hand corner. And interestingly enough, we also have a little bit of a crosswalk with ESF12 and the utilities honeycomb. And I'm just starting to become more familiar with the collaborative economy utilities companies. What I've gathered from them so far is that it's kind of like a crowdsourcing, like a sharing of utility costs, so that an entire community, so if one person falls behind on bills, the community supports them. So it's just something to think about. It's something that kind of brings us an idea of how exactly we can start to crosswalk emergency management into the collaborative economy and vice versa. So I just kind of briefly went over how these can be integrated, why it makes sense, but how does this actually occur? How can you actually begin to have this integration? So in order to start to illustrate that, I wanted to look at a case study. And there's two of them. I have Bayshare and Airbnb. So in June of 2013, San Francisco began incorporating the collaborative economy into disaster preparedness through a partnership with Bayshare. And what Bayshare is it's an organization that's focused on integrating the collaborative economy into the San Francisco Bay Area community, not just for emergency management, but again in that daily operation, building that better mousetrap and having it become part of an integrated society. This partnership really focuses on building a more resilient community as a whole with this particular San Francisco emergency management and Bayshare collaboration. And it really does build a more resilient community by using collaborative consumption to do things like conduct public outreach and education, and also to provide services to individuals affected by disaster. Essentially, back in 2013, San Francisco recognized this power of the collaborative economy to maximize civic involvement and brought that whole community together for a common goal. In late 2014, representatives from Portland, Oregon joined San Francisco to announce an official preparedness partnership with Airbnb as part of the White House's Innovation for Disaster Response and Recovery Initiative Demo Day. And this partnership was developed through two independent memorandums of understanding, MOUs, one between Airbnb in Portland, one between Airbnb in San Francisco. And basically what these MOUs did was they pre-identified and activated participating Airbnb hosts during an emergency. They provide preparedness educational materials to Airbnb and hosts. They notify Airbnb users of incidents and provide training to Airbnb hosts regarding community emergency response. So you really start to see how that integration occurs. And what better way to do it than something that every single community needs during major disasters, which is mass care and sheltering. So next, I wanted to just briefly discuss some of the concerns and considerations regarding emergency management and the collaborative economy. I say briefly because there are a lot of unknowns. These are issues that are currently being discussed and mitigated because, again, this concept is so new. As such, I wanted to talk about some of these questions and issues, but unfortunately I don't have the answers for them. And quite frankly, if this topic interests you, concerns and considerations could be a subject for one of your projects. I think it would be a fantastic opportunity to really delve into this a little bit more. So as I mentioned earlier, the collaborative economy is incredibly volatile. Startups are launching and closing based on needs, and again, that collaborative economy model has not yet regulated itself. As a result, emergency managers really need to develop a type of benefit cost analysis when considering a partnership with one of these companies. Developing such partnerships take time, they take effort, and they take resources. They take a huge amount of resources to get everything in place. So if a startup is dissolved after an MOU has been developed and implemented, after that startup has been integrated into all different facets of emergency management, then all of that time and effort and resources are lost. I mean, that being said, there are really few indicators currently regarding whether or not a startup will succeed, again, because it is so new. So safety is another issue. If you do a search, you can 100% you can find horror stories where that key factor, when we talk about trust all the time, that key factor of trust was broken. Both Airbnb and Uber have their fair share of such stories. But I mean, when we talk about safety, it's not just for the consumer, but it's for the provider as well. I don't know if you remember, but a few months ago, there was a video of an Uber driver who was attacked by his drunk passenger. So, I mean, when you start putting private citizens into situations surrounded by disaster, there's no real way to know how they'll react. You know, who will be held liable if something goes wrong? Will it be the startup? Will it be the individual? And beyond that, I mean, how do you vet those people who offer their services during a disaster? Again, I don't know the answers, but these are definitely questions to ask as integration occurs, and you can kind of see a little bit of those those questions being answered with Airbnb's initiative with Portland and with San Francisco, where again they provide training, they provide information, and Airbnb hosts are trained as much as they can be as private citizens. Finally, I was discussing this topic with a colleague of mine on the way to a meeting a few weeks ago, and he says, well, this is all well and good, but what about cybersecurity? And that's true. All of these platforms are based on connectivity, and outside of the integration I've been discussing this entire time with how the collaborative economy can help emergency management, you know, how do potential cyber disruptions influence the collaborative economy as a whole? Quite possibly, this threat of cybersecurity has the potential to create serious incidents within the collaborative economy itself. And cybersecurity as a whole is quickly changing from an IT issue to one that's meshing with traditional EM practices. For example, just the other day I participated in an IPM, an initial planning meeting, for a cybersecurity tabletop, and I'm by no means an IT expert. So in this instance, the collaborative economy could benefit from interaction with emergency management experts by developing cyber response and continuity of operations planning initiatives. So if you take a look at what I have there on the left, when robots take the wheel, so this next cybersecurity issue with the collaborative economy may be a little bit out there. But this is really something that I have heard more and more information about since moving out west into moving in that whole San Francisco Bay, Silicon Valley area. And that's basically about how self-driving cars are going to take over the world. If you do a search of self-driving cars, if you just Google it, you will see a lot of new information coming out, most of it just within the past 2 months. And there has been some discussion about these transportation collaborative economy companies such as Uber, such as Lyft, and how within the next 10 to 15 years they could very well be self-driving cars as opposed to individuals. So integration of this type of technology into the collaborative economy could have both benefits and negative impacts. Benefits include having automated systems that circumvent the safety issues that we discussed earlier. If you have a self-driving car, you don't have to worry about, if they're going to take you somewhere and do something bad to you. Likewise, you can't really beat up a self-driving car. But on the other hand, what happens if those automated systems are infiltrated through cybersecurity issues? So that's just something to consider. Like I said, it may be a little out there, but it's the wave of the future. So I wanted to just go over a case study, and this is Uber's disaster response growing pains. This is the brand new Uber icon. In case you were familiar with it before, they just recently changed their icon. And so the first real instance of using the collaborative economy during a disaster occurred during Hurricane Sandy. And the lessons learned during Hurricane Sandy changed the way that Uber operates and coordinates during a disaster. While some companies immediately revised business practices to assist those in need, for example, Airbnb immediately provided cost-free temporary housing options for those that were affected by Sandy. So there were instances of these collaborative economy companies saying, okay, we recognize there's a need, we recognize that our normal business model isn't going to work, what can we do to help? Well, Uber didn't do that. Uber came under fire, particularly in New York City, due to its continuation of its surge pricing model. Surge pricing, for those of you who aren't aware, it's an elevated cost associated with the saturation of demand within a geographical area. So for example, if you want to go from point A to B, and there's 10 other people who want to leave from point A, and there's only one Uber driver, the cost of that, of going from point A to B, will be multiplied depending on the need for the demand. So this was going on all over the city during Hurricane Sandy. And customer complaints became pouring in because those surge pricing models were so high. So what Uber did was they reversed the surge pricing for customers, and only for customers. As a result, Uber ended up footing an approximately $100,000 bill of surge costs accrued over just 1 day's worth of business. And I stress that surge pricing was reversed for customers because while that pricing surge wasn't passed to passengers, drivers were still operating under the surge model, which means drivers still needed to be paid that multiplier. That's why Uber had to foot the bill. About a year later, Uber surge pricing was again a hot topic. The first snowstorm of 2013 had Uber customers seeing outrageous bills, including a $91 3-mile trip. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy, right? I wouldn't pay $91 for a 3-mile trip. I would walk it, but if you're in a disaster, you don't really have that luxury. So after Hurricane Sandy and the 2013 snowstorm, Uber appeared to work towards more of a common community goal. And in July 2014, they announced their partnership with American Red Cross. And what this partnership says is that Uber will include self-implementing triggering actions for operations during disasters. And Uber now provides corporate donation to the American Red Cross during disaster and states of emergency. And finally, they cap that surge feature when needed for both passengers and drivers. All right, so we have looked at what the collaborative economy is, how it can benefit emergency management. We've looked at some ways in which it's worked and hasn't worked. So what's next? Well, collaboration, of course. That's the word of the day. So the first thing that we want to look at when you're trying to integrate the emergency management and collaborative economy together is what's available now. Some companies currently have disaster preparedness platforms, and you can do a little bit of background research and see exactly how they can be integrated into your current operations. As we mentioned, Airbnb already has some partnerships. You can definitely approach them. They have a model that works. They have a model that's been proven. Additionally, you have some startups such as TaskRabbit, which is a platform that allows allows assistance with small jobs and household errands. You have Yammer, which is a communications platform. So just take a look at what's available now instead of having to start from scratch. So if you're looking and you have a need and you can't find a platform that already integrates emergency management with their operations, see if there's one that kind of does it on the economic level. So identify gaps in your current capabilities and research potential sharing economy solutions. See if you can find a company that specializes in the type of resource you need. Now, from there, as I mentioned, one of the concerns is that this is still a expanding and contracting marketplace, and it hasn't regulated itself. So in order to maximize resources, as part of this process, you should really do a little background investigation into your identified startup. What are you going to do if a startup dissolves? Again, part of this is hit and miss, but take steps to make an educated and strategic step towards integration based on what you perceive as their strength in the actual economy and their potential to succeed. So from there, who can I contact? Once you identify a possible partner, reach out and open a dialogue. As we mentioned earlier, many sharing economies have a holistic community value, and they're based on trust. And they would welcome an opportunity to provide additional community services in partnership with the local government. When I was doing some of this research for this presentation as well as the upcoming presentation in May, I had a question for a startup called Yerdle, and I'll actually discuss that a little bit later. And I had no idea who to talk to, so I went onto Yerdle's platform, and I saw who their PR rep was, and I just sent an email. And within, I would say, a half an hour, I had a response, and an hour later, I was on the phone with their PR rep talking about this very subject. So, I mean, they're really, really open. A lot of these smaller startups only have a few dozen employees, so it's best to get in with them now, and you'll be able to make those connections much, much easier as opposed to when they're a little bigger, such as an Uber and Airbnb. So next is, what can I learn from you? You are the subject matter expert for your emergency management program, just as they are the subject matter experts for their company. Again, I'm not a tech person. I'm an emergency management planner. I'm going to talk to a company and see what they can provide me, and I'll give them the same. I'll say, okay, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about continuity of operations? Have you thought about what's going to happen during cybersecurity issues? So, I mean, you really want to best maximize that partnership. And from there, you could really come up with some unique solutions that you may not have necessarily thought of on your own, because you have that sounding board, because you have those subject matter experts on their side. So next is, how can I integrate this platform into my plans? The best thing to do at this point, and you made the initial discussions, you identified the mutual benefits for both you and the startup. You have your MOU in place, so what next? What do you actually do now that you have this fantastic partnership? Well, the first thing you do is you designate a point of contact. You designate that point person to coordinate with the startups and integrate them using Instinct Man systems. And that's something that will probably be very, very foreign to a startup. How many people outside of emergency management know, the ICS structure? I would venture to guess not very many. So from there, you really want to develop specific plans regarding how those resources will be used, when they'll be used, and also, of course, when they'll be activated, in addition to how they'll be activated. And finally, what's in the pipeline? So you want to periodically monitor the internet for additional sharing economy platforms, because they may play a role in meeting some of those additional needs that you identify later when it comes to responding, recovering, and mitigating a disaster. All right. So, collaborative economy is, again, this new model that's constantly evolving. And as we've discussed, startups such as Airbnb, Yammer, TaskRabbit, they've all begun to integrate into emergency management. And they have programs, MOUs in place in support of disaster response. So remember those families that we discussed earlier and how easily some of them fell into those emergency support functions? Well, over the next few slides, I'm going to present some startups and a brief description of each. And I want to try to open a dialogue and see if you can think of some ways in which they can be integrated into your current emergency management program. Now, some are much easier than others when you're dealing with tangible assets. You know, that's a lot easier than something that's a little more higher level. So, I mean, there's really no wrong answer. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity at this point to exercise your creativity and to kind of figure out how some of these startups may help within the emergency management cycle. So, to give you an example, we'll discuss Airbnb. We've covered Airbnb quite extensively during this presentation, so you're already familiar with what it is, and you can hopefully by this time see the correlation between emergency management and collaborative economy. So what does Airbnb have to offer? It has to offer space. Again, it's an alternate for hotels, so you have people who have unused space that they're providing at a cost to the general public. And in an emergency situation, how can this help? Well, it can help in mass care. If people have unused space during an emergency, you know, they can take in 4 or 5 people. If you have thousands of Airbnb hosts who are able to do this, you're really increasing your capability. So how can Airbnb expand mass care capabilities? And we kind of touched on that. It provides additional housing options beyond traditional mass care shelters. Again, if you have a general community shelter that can only house 1,000 people, but then you have, say in like a city like New York, you have 2,000 Airbnb hosts who have the training, who are part of this MOU, you know, you're expanding your sheltering capability by an additional 2,000 at least. All right, so that's our example. So the first company that we are going to look at, I kind of talked to you about before, Yurtle. I have some key bullets for you. The things offered on Yurtle range from household knickknacks, shoes, clothes, toys, things like that. Additionally, users can request specific items that they may be looking for, like a type of sweater, type of shoe, things like that. Another point which I don't have up there, but again, it really kind of drives home. Oh, I just see, Elise, it could offer up options for residents with unique needs like allergies or access issues. Oh, Airbnb, yep. I agree. So Yurtle's mission statement is to, quote, make it easier to give your item to someone who needs it. And again, it goes back to that entire issue of trust. It goes back to collaboration, again, the word of the day. But you know, you can't really get much more whole community than that, can you? I mean, you make it easy to give your item to someone who needs it. So with this information, I just wanted to pose a few questions. So the first one is, what does Yurtle have to offer? And this should be an easy one. I kind of already gave you the answer. Anybody? Yep, exactly. Resources for people who lose possessions after a disaster. Sarah, great. Supplies that could be utilized in a disaster. That's exactly right. I mean, you have clothes, you have household goods, you have toys, you have shoes. All of these things are donations that people who have lost everything may need. So what emergency management function may utilize YRTL? And again, I kind of gave you the answer. It's donations management. So what's really interesting is that when I spoke to YRTL, the woman from YRTL, they currently don't have a specific disaster management program in place, but this platform was developed in such a way that YRTL users from around the country have actually self-organized in order to help out victims in local house fires. So my final question is, how can YRTL help expand donations management capabilities? And again, it's by collecting those supplies, collecting those needed goods in support of victims of a disaster. YRTL is particularly interesting because the woman that I spoke to mentioned that they do. Oh, we have a response as well. So I see Troy mentioned that my major concern is the dependence on the internet during a disaster. Also, 50% of lower-income families don't have smartphones. Widespread power outages, earthquake, Sandy, Katrina also need to be considered. That is of course that's a concern. That's a great additional consideration when looking into integration of collaborative economy into emergency management. What I will say to that is that's why you need to have those MOUs in place, so that you can really hash out some of these issues. In regards to 50% of lower income families not having smartphones, this doesn't need to be done on an individual basis. If you have an emergency management program that already integrates something like YRTL into operations, it can be done at that coordination level as opposed to depending on individuals and their personal requests. That's a fantastic point, though. All right, so the next one is GoFundMe. Some of you may have heard about this before. It's a personal or campaign funding website. There's an ability to share via social media, so you can create a GoFundMe campaign and then copy it to your social media and just increase your reach beyond just your friends, especially if they share. You can accept donations via check or bank transfer. And you can also track donation providers. So how can this be used in your emergency management program? Survivor donations, exactly. And in addition to that, this really allows, it's a great platform for coordinating and tracking those financial donations through a single platform. Currently what you have now is you have a disaster and you have this influx of donations, but donations management in and of itself is a huge issue. Yep, exactly, Troy, central point of donations for items not covered by Red Cross or Salvation Army. Exactly, because if you have people who are writing checks and bringing them in, who coordinates all of that? Who collects all of that? By pointing people to something like the GoFundMe, as Troy mentioned, it's a central point of donations for items not covered by Red Cross. As a note, crowdsourced fundraising is becoming more and more essential to raising donations for major disasters. GoFundMe itself has actually had campaigns that have been used in recent incidents, such as the Nepal earthquake and also recovery from the Ferguson riots. All right, so now we're getting into some of the trickier ones. The last one I think is the most tricky, but I also think it's the most interesting. So let's take a look at liquid space. So liquid space provides business rental space, provides recreation space. It's available space without leasing or other real estate legalities, and you can rent the space by the month. So looking into and thinking of different aspects of an emergency management program, why would you ever possibly need business rental space? How could that be integrated into your program?
I'm just thinking something similar to like, I don't even know what, I'm losing the word for it, but when like FEMA, yeah, like when FEMA sets up something like after a disaster, you know, like where survivors go to get funding or, you know, reimbursement for disaster costs, something like that. Just a common gathering area.
Yep. Exactly, exactly. Immediately after a disaster, you can have those disaster volunteer workstations for recovery operations such as FEMA and things like that. There's another thing that can be done, kind of not looking at outside organizations coming in, but what about businesses that have been completely destroyed? Isn't it possible that you could use liquid space to perhaps serve as a continuity of operations facility for those local businesses to make sure that they recover more quickly? Yeah, excellent. All right, so the last one is, I think, the trickiest, but I also think it's the most fascinating. And this is Coursera. Some of you may have already taken some courses on Coursera, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it is an education platform. They provide online courses to anyone who wants to take them, and you can get some fantastic courses from Stanford University, Oxford. I mean, across the world, you can actually fit in and take these free courses from some top name schools from across the world. There's no set schedule. You can take classes whenever you want. And again, it's a worldwide reach. So you can take a class from University of Bonn, for example. So with emergency management, how could Coursera increase your capability? Troy, exactly. Train spontaneous volunteers. I mean, with something like this, you have an opportunity to train those people who, you know, need to go through the vetting process, but also at the same time need to get that just-in-time training so that they are able to be integrated as quickly as possible. So, and Elise said the just-in-time training as well. The other thing that you can use with Coursera is, you know, prior to deployment, if you have people who are coming in, if you have a major disaster where people are coming in from across the country, you can use this, you can potentially use this platform as a standardized virtual training for all of those mobilized responders. And they can take that training before they even leave their house, before they even leave their state. Excellent. So, just to kind of conclude, we've seen that the collaborative economy is really, truly a high-functioning model of the whole community. And it really could provide emergency managers with this unique opportunity to tap into the fabric of residents and local business and really emphasize that whole community approach. And with Coursera, we also mentioned this can ensure that non-trained volunteers have a useful way to contribute. They can take their just-in-time training, everything else. So the utilization of the collaborative economy during disaster, again, it's a really new concept. And just as the model itself is new, shortcomings are to be expected, but the potential for increasing community resilience is really, really strengthened and will continue to grow as the collaborative economy continues to expand. Any questions? I would recommend that and I'll type his name in the. I recommend that you look up Jeremiah Owyang. Again, he is the gentleman that created that collaborative economy honeycomb. He's based out of Silicon Valley, founder of Crowd Companies. He is really on top of the collaborative economy, and any sort of question that you have about it, he probably has the answer. With Crowd Companies, you can actually see some of his membership, which include the behemoths like Airbnb and Uber. They also include some of the smaller known ones, which I can't think of off the top of my head right now, but they're out there. So yeah, I would recommend going to his website. If you just type in his name in Google, it'll pull up his website. I believe it's webstrategist.com or something like that. Any other questions?
Jessica, I had a question. It's kind of specific, but you might have the answer to this. When you were doing your research and looking at Uber, did you find any information on Uber and like driver policies during emergencies? Like, what do they tell their drivers to do if they're in like Dallas, Fort Worth, and there's a tornado warning, or a flash flood warning, or a severe thunderstorm warning? Does Uber have any contingency plans for what's going to happen during those instances?
That's a great question, and that's actually something that I made a note to investigate further. I don't have the answer for that. I would imagine that they do. However, again, they're in the business of connecting people for rides. They're not necessarily in the business of disaster preparedness. So I don't know the answer to that, but that's definitely something to look into. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. It was great coming back to Millersville virtually. And just as kind of a funny side note, that is actually a real picture. I swiped that from my supervisor who uses it in the majority of his presentations. Apparently there's golf tournament rules that says that you need to continue to play golf no matter what. And there you go. House fire behind you. Still got to make that par. So thank you very much. And thank you, Sarah. And if you have any additional questions, there's my contact information up there. And thanks again.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, everybody, for coming on today. We appreciate you taking the time.